Nación de las Antigüedades de los Indios, a narration about the antiquities of the Indians. It's a book that was written by a Spanish chronicler, a monk called Ramon Pane. And he was assigned this task by Christopher Columbus. You have to remember that in Columbus's time, the only people that they're calling Indians was the Taíno. It was just the Caribbean. So this book is where we get all of this information about Yokahu, Yaya, Atabey, all of these words that are used now by a lot of Taínos, they come from that book. Some of that terminology, not a lot of it, some of that terminology survived in common speak, like a hammock, comes from a Taíno word, hamaca. Canoe, that is derived from the Taíno word canoa. There's a lot of words. Maíz comes from the Taíno, maize comes from the Taíno word maíz. Mani, which is what we call peanuts in the Caribbean, that comes from the Taíno word mani. So there's a lot of words. Barbecue comes from the word barbacoa. So there are a lot of words that do come, and we know hurricane comes from huracán. Ramon Pane wrote down that they spoke, that the native people called the dead, souls of the dead, opia. And there is a tradition in Jamaica, I believe it's Jamaica, but I may be wrong, but I think it's in Jamaica, where there is a tradition that has survived to this day, where they speak about the souls of the dead and they call them obea. So that word obviously comes from opia. So at the top of the hierarchy, of course, is Yokahu and Atabey. Atabey is the mother spirit. Atabey is associated with creative energy, because she has this cave womb. Everything comes out of there, Everything comes out of her womb. So remember, Ramon Pane didn't have a whole lot of time or resource. He ran out of paper. But he did have enough to tell us that two sets of things came out of Atabey. One was human beings. They came out of a cave called Casibahagua. He says, these people tell me that their ancestors came out of a cave called Casibahagua, which is in a mountain called Canta or Cauta. And so now we see that, and we make the logical conclusion that if things are coming out of the earth, then the ancient Taínos must have perceived the earth as a living entity that could give birth. And it's obvious. It just speaks for itself. And then there's another place in his narration where he talks about the sun and the moon coming out of a cave. A cave called Iguanaboina. The word iguana is in there. Iguanaboina and the cave, and that's the place where these two semis are, Boinayel and Marohu, the spirit of rain and the spirit of dry weather, are inside Iguanaboina, and that's where the sun and the moon come out of. And they associated the sun with dry weather and the moon with wet weather. And they associated the sun with male energy and the moon with female energy, because even though that there's also a male interpretation of the moon, and that's one of the things that makes Taíno culture so complex, is that there's opposites, complementary opposites in everything, and there's always duality in everything. The supreme being itself is part male and part female. So this entity, the identity of the moon, could manifest as a female because of the lunar cycles of 28 days, which is obviously the 28 days of the menstrual period, and all of that moisture stuff that is associated with femaleness in the indigenous mind. But then there's a male identity. So the moon could have these two identities, like night and day. And the male identity of the moon manifested itself in overly strong and painful menstrual cramps. And the name of the male identity of the moon was Huacar. He was the twin of Yokahu. He came out of the same womb as Yokahu. It is assumed that he gave his mother a lot of trouble, because here he is inside her womb giving her harsh menstrual cramps, right? So he is associated with, unpleasant experiences, the tough hardships of life, And so in English, when you're having a hard time, you can say, if something is rough, something is bad, you can say that's a pain in the neck, or a pain in something else, okay? We believe that the ancient Taínos would say, and it had nothing to do with gender. It was just a generalized thing that was used for men or women. That's a pain in the womb. And that's any kind of a harsh experience, any kind of a tough experience was called a pain in the womb, whether you're a man or a woman. It isn't like men were appropriating female identity. It was because that's what the ancient Taínos perceived as something that was harsh, was a pain in the womb. Huacar. One mythologist, a fellow by the name of Joseph Campbell, analyzed that word into three parts. Wa, which means our. Wa is always our. Ka, which means strong or harsh. And iri is something that happens every 28 days. Something that happens cyclically every 28 days. Wa ka iri, wakar. Our harsh menstrual cramps. That's his name, literally. Our harsh menstrual cramps. Okay, and his twin brother, Yokahu, the Lord of the Life Force, his name literally means soul or breath of the yucca plant. Arawakan is a language family that the Taíno language belongs to. But there's other tribes, other tribal languages that belong to the Arawakan language family. The Wapishanas, the Loconos, the Kalinago. There's a bunch of different tribes that all belong to the Arawakan language family. So these people that have been analyzing the word Yaya have come to the conclusion that it's derived from the repetition of one word, Ya, which Ramon Pane said is the word that is used for the soul of a living person. Remember that the soul of a dead person is called an opia, but a living person's soul is called Ya. And when you say Ya 2 times, you magnify it. So Ya is the soul that you have and I have. But Yaya is the divine soul, is the all soul, the supreme soul. So the conclusion that these scholars have come to is that when they say the word Yaya, they really mean it's like the supreme being, the great spirit, okay? A kind of like deity. Now, there is one scholar by the name of Sebastián Rubio Lamarche that has gone beyond that. He accepts the terminology of Yaya as a supreme being. But he says that this supreme being is composed of 2 elements that represents the polar complementary energies, the female and the male. So Yaya is composed of 1 part female, which is the creative entity Atabe, and 1 part male, which is the spirit of life and energy, Yokahu. And together, they are Yaya. Now we, in the Caney circle, have taken it even to another level, beyond what these other scholars. And we feel that Yaya was a name that was given to 2 characters, not just 1. They believe that Yaya was given to one, and Sebastián Rubio Lamarche believes that it was given to that one character. But we believe that no, this was given to two characters. That it is indeed the name of the Great Spirit, but it also was given to a human being called Yaya. Now, let me explain that, because there is a precedent to that. In the Spanish language, for instance, you have the name of the divinity, the Savior is Jesus. But then there's all these people, Jesus Rodriguez, Jesus Jimenez. They're not Jesus. They're just some guy with the same name. You understand? So you can have the divinity have that name, Jesus, which means Jesus. But then you can have a random person living on earth called Jesus. Okay? The same thing happens in Aztec. That's not the only precedent, the Spanish language. It also happens in the Aztec language. In the Aztec language, there was a divinity called Quetzalcoatl, which means the feathered serpent. Quetzalcoatl was a god, a divinity. But then there was a person, a king, who went by the same name. And some people they confuse the divinity with the king. But the king was one person, and the divinity is another. And Quetzalcoatl, the god, the king, he was just a person. In fact, he was so human that he was overthrown by his own priests. They kicked him out, and he had to leave, or they were going to kill him. So those are two precedents in which you have the name of a divinity given to a human being. So there can be two, and they can be confused. Right? I believe, and we in the Caney Circle hold, that the word Yaya was given to the Great Spirit, yes, like Sebastián Rubio Lamarche suggests, and some of the other scholars. But it was also given to a person, a human being. So to eliminate the confusion in the Caney Circle, we give them last names, you know? So Yaya, the divine entity, we call him Yaya Guaturey, which means Yaya, our heaven, or our cosmos. And the guy with the son that rebelled against him, we call him Yaya Locuo. And we get that name Locuo from a Kalinago legend for the first human being. The first human being was called Locuo. So we borrowed that name from the Kalinago language, which, remember, is related to Taíno. They are cousins. So we borrowed that word from the Kalinago language, and we called the human guy, the human Yaya, Yaya Locuo. So there's Yaya Guaturey, the Great Spirit, formed of Atabe and Yokahu together. It's a bigendered entity, a two-spirit entity, you know, Yaya. And then there's Yaya Locuo, the human